So yesterday we were talking about the audit process and the reports. So this is kind of a continuation of that, only we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about forms that we are asking you to fill out so that you have some idea of what we're looking for and how you're going to get them. That process has changed a little bit this year. As you can already see, I am not Ricky, so I do not have the pretty signs and the pretty pictures and the animation, so bear with me on this. I was lucky to get a screenshot in here. I thought I was doing pretty hot there. So this is the website you're all familiar with that you report your financial report for your prior year. The annual report is required by statute in the form prescribed by the state examiner. This is the format that is prescribed, the gateway template. It is due 60 days after the close of each fiscal year, which is March 1st, unless it's a leap year. The report that you provide, the annual financial report that you provide through the gateway system, is the basis of the financial report that we audit. Unless you are fortunate enough to be a county that does GAAP reporting, and then we're going to audit your GAAP financial statements. But for the majority, it is the annual financial report through Gateway. And that's why we're saying, when Tammy was talking about schedules and different things, we don't start our audits for 2019 until after March 1st, 2020, because we got to have those financial statements, because that's what we're starting with. It's very, very important that those financial statements are as accurate as you can make them. It is possible, I kind of want to point out, because we talked a little bit about it this year, it is possible to unsubmit and correct if you want to make a correction prior to us coming out for audit. Once we complete the exit, and you've done any corrections that we've requested on the annual financial report, it is locked and it cannot be changed again. If you do unsubmit to make corrections, you must resubmit, or it's blank for the public. And you will be hearing from us if it is. We really pay a lot of attention towards March 1st to make sure that they're all in. And we let you know if you are ever been late on it. You hear from us if it is not in on time. We need to get those reports in. But just remember, if you have to unsubmit it for any reason, make sure you resubmit it. Okay. So you need to prepare for your annual financial report. A lot of this is going to be similar to what Ricky was talking about for preparing for the CFA, which is part of the annual financial report. You need to make sure that you've got your year-end done. Are all your transactions posted? Have you made any correcting entries that need to be made through the end of December? Does your funds ledger reconcile to the treasurer's fund ledger? So you have that comparison that you're doing each month. Are you on that? Does the treasurer then reconcile to the bank? Because that reconcilement is what's supporting that financial statement. So you need to make sure those pieces are in place. Gateway itself does not require the reconcilement. You don't have to post that, but you still need to make sure it's done because we will be auditing for that. We talked about yesterday the substantive testing for your cash and investment balance. That bank reconcilement is a big piece of that, so it's very important that you have that. Once you're working on that, you need to be collecting the supplemental information from your departments that keep funds outside of your funds ledger that need to be included. The most common of these, the sheriff's commissary and inmate trust, and if they have another account they're keeping out there, the clerk's trust and child support if they're two separate accounts. The treasurer's after settlement collections, we'll talk a little bit about that. But there's money that the county has that's not on your funds ledger and is not ever going to be on your funds ledger that you need to bring in on those supplemental reports. If you have a tourism commission and they keep their bank account outside of yours, that's going to be a supplemental report. If you have a county home and they have it Resident trust balance, that's money that needs to be come into this so that we have a comprehensive financial report. So once you know that your funds ledger part is complete, you will upload it onto Gateway. It's possible to manually input the financial information, but I cannot imagine a county wanting to do that because that'd be a whole lot of typing. So once you've uploaded the information from the software, you have the ability to edit that information and add those supplemental funds. You do need to remember, if you re-upload, if you decide there was an error in the upload and you redo it, anything you edited is then going to be taken out and you'd have to put those back in. It's going to go back to square one based on what you've just uploaded for the second time. And I do want to point out there is a user guide on the Gateway page. They try to keep it as current as possible. It has a lot of useful information in it. I go to it a lot when you ask me Gateway questions. It's a really good resource. So keep that in mind when you're going through the information on, uploading the information on Gateway. So it is a good idea that you have some additional procedures in place to request and gather the supplemental report. You should kind of know which departments need to get it into you. Some people email, I don't know, how you get broadcast out the little reminders that, hey, I need to get this information from you. On our website, there is a supplemental report template. It's in Excel. And there's instructions, so you can direct your departments to that, or you can download it and send it to them so that they have it. Okay, so again, the different departments. What the treasurer is providing is the after-settlement collections. This is kind of different than anybody else's, and it has caused some issues in the past when we've been reviewing audit reports. Basically, all they're giving you, they're not giving you a true, like the other departments, a true beginning balance, receipts, disbursements, and ending balance, because they have a daily cash sheet, and it's just too much information to try to summarize in that report. So the workaround that we gave is they're basically giving you how much money they have on the cash book that's not in the funds ledger at December 31st. So from the last time they settled, what they've collected and has not been settled yet. And so in order to do that, you start, the beginning balance they'll start with is last year's report. So if you get the report, that's the first thing I would check. Does it balance to last year's report? Then they're going to put in, technically do it correctly, that exact same amount in disbursements to back that number out. And then in receipts, they're going to put what they have on their cash book at 12/31, which should be on their 47 TR. So again, you can check to make sure that's what they're reconciling to. So you have some comfort level that what they're giving you is reasonable. Okay. The clerk will provide a supplemental AFR for the trust fund and the child support if it's separate, or sometimes they combine them. They also do a monthly financial report. So you have some idea. Again, you can kind of look and make sure that what they're giving you is reasonable compared to their monthly financial report for December. The sheriff provides information on the commissary fund and inmate trust fund. You really don't have much to compare that to, except maybe last year's, to see if there's some, if it still looks reasonable. If it doesn't, you might question them. They are supposed to provide reports twice a year, which should also give you some information. So this information you're going to have to manually enter in, these supplemental funds, because they're not part of your upload, they're not on your funds ledger. And you are not, and I want to make sure that you are not responsible for their reports, but you are responsible for the whole financial report. So if it doesn't look reasonable to you, you need to do some questioning on that. If we find out, if you reach out and they say, no, that's exactly what we had, and so that's what you put, and it's wrong, the finding is on them, because they're the ones supplying that information to you. But if you aren't even looking at it and making sure that it looks reasonable or it makes sense, if you, last year, the after settlement collections were about $500,000, and this year they're $3 million, then we're going to, that could fall on then the internal control deficiency. Are you looking at how reasonable that is? So again, I'm not saying you're responsible for it, but it doesn't hurt to look at it and just see if it makes kind of sense with what you know is coming through through these departments as well. Ricky's already talked about this with the CFA, but also with the financial report. Whoever's entering it in, it's a good idea if someone else reviews it. So print it out or online, or you're looking at it, trace it back to your funds ledger, because even with an upload, mistakes can happen. Maybe you didn't, track the funds to the right place. If you're pulling your user funds up into one, for example. If you're data entering, to have them track the information on the supplemental funds back to those supplemental reports that you got to make sure there wasn't any data errors and how that was posted. Document, document, document. Whoever reviews it, have them document somehow that they have reviewed it and looked it over. But it's another set of eyes on there. It's part of the controls over that. Again, some of the most common findings that we have is there were no internal controls over the preparation of the AFR, and there were no internal controls over the preparation of the CFA. Those are some of the more common ones, and we're trying to give you some ideas. There is no, there's no uniform guidance on you have to do it this way. We're just trying to give you some ideas that you can think about to show that you are looking at this. This is your representation of what your county's financial picture is. And is it reasonable? Is it accurate? Is it the best information that you can provide on that? Just because it's running through Gateway, we don't want you to divorce ownership of it. That, it's your problem now, because it is your financial information. Okay. So things to consider. Who's going to do the review after it's compiled? Again, have a second person, second set of eyes. How are you going to document that? That's up to you, but some way show that it's been done. What procedures are going to be followed? We're tracing it back to the source documents. We're doing, we're comparing to last year, whatever procedures you want your reviewer to look at. And then how are corrections processed? That should be part of your internal controls. If you're questioning something on there, if it doesn't look right, if the CFA doesn't look right, how are you processing to get that corrected? Are you just shrugging and going, oh, well, it's the best we can do? Are you really digging in and trying to find out what the correct answer is and getting those things corrected? Any questions on preparing the AFR?
Rather than putting our supplementals and adding them to our cash fund balances so that that's all in one, have you ever given any thought to it having its own place for all of these supplementals? Like how we've got our CFA and how we've got our, like giving it its own little area, because they don't really have anything to do with our cash. It's easier for us to balance a review without those in there.
We can take that under advisement, but you need to understand when we come into audit, we are auditing the total number on that financial report. So whether it's added in Gateway or it's a separate section, we're still auditing that financial statement in total. Mm-hmm. So we're going to want to be able to reconcile to that total amount, including those supplemental funds. So if it's a matter of an ease of entry, we can take that under advisement and talk to our Gateway staff, our technical staff on that. But you're still responsible for the entire amount being able to reconcile.
And I understand that. I just thought it would be nice to have its own little area for supplementals.
We can take that under advisement and see how hard it is. I am not a technical person, how hard it is to reprogram that.
I'm just happy if my computer turns on.
I have two questions. The first one is, do we need to add the road infrastructure into the capital assets? There's an infrastructure. Does that need to include the roads?
Your roads should be included in your capital asset, yes.
Okay. And my second question is, when you were talking about balancing the supplemental report for the treasurer to what again? Did you say 47 TR?
The monthly treasurer report.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
During the audit process, our audit teams do a risk assessment. This is similar to that we talked about yesterday, that same process that you're doing as part of internal controls. But what they are doing is assessing audit risk. So what we are looking for when we're doing our risk assessment is what is the risk that there are material misstatements in the annual financial report that have not been detected and corrected. That's step one we do is reviewing your internal controls. As I talked about, we look at inherent risk, what's just riskier because of what it is, and then what kind of controls are in place. So that's why we have to look at your internal controls, because if we can rely on those, that means less testing, less time in the field, less cost to you. So when we do our risk assessment, it helps us focus. Where are we spending our time? Are there departments that we need to be looking at? Are there certain areas of the financial statements that are going to need more time than others? Okay, we are now going to segue into forms. So our office, Tammy talked about it, or somebody did yesterday. I'm getting a little confused who said what. Maybe I said it. But anyway, part of when your audit has been assigned, part of the preliminary work our central engagements are doing is they're sending information to you, the financial statements and the CFA, and some forms for you to fill out before we ever get there. And we're going to go over those forms, what they are, how they're filled out, why we need them. And again, I stole this from another director, so if you see Todd, tell him thank you. This is totally beyond my capability. I don't even know where they get it. Anyway, and what he said to his is, I'm sure most of you do not share the opinion that Will Ferrell has from the movie Elf, that forms are everybody's favorite. But the forms that we send you are going to provide valuable information that we can use in planning and the whole audit process. And these start even before we walk in the door. So again, we're trying to do as much preliminary work either centrally or before we ever come on site, so that our time then can be devoted to the testing that we need to do, so that our time spent in your office is as short as possible, and our interruption to your functions as well, but that we still get the sufficient audit evidence to put those opinions on a report. So when your audit is assigned for this year, we're going to send this packet out to you. And we are looking at 2018. So it talked a little bit about it yesterday. I want to reemphasize the audit period is last year. We're sending you the forms this year. We have to keep in mind, where are we with, for example, in internal controls? What was in place during the audit period? I know that seems very complicated. It does to us as well when we have to keep focusing that. But for example, if you had no controls the first half of the year, and maybe you were new to the office and you're just going along to get along, and about halfway through the year you figure we need some controls in place, and you implement them for the last half of the year. We need to know that, because we may focus more of our attention on the first half of the year, because we can rely on controls in the last half if we do some testing. So it's important we know that. If you change your controls, we need to know that, because we need to know what we're relying on, what you're doing, where the risks are. And so timing is very, very important. And we are hoping that by sending them out to you, and you can update them on your timetable instead of us coming in and sitting down on day one and going, I need to talk to you for a couple hours, that it will give you more flexibility and be more efficient for you. If it's coming out a couple weeks before we come out, that gives you time to work on it on your schedule. Okay, so the Form 7 is one of the forms that we send. It's called Understanding Internal Controls. Has lots of pages in it. We are required by auditing standards to obtain this information and to document this information. So when we go under peer review, they're looking to see that we've done this for every unit that we've audited. And I would like to point out, that peer review is very important to us. We are getting audited, as the board talked about yesterday. We're getting audited just as you were getting audited, but it does have future ramifications. If we fail an audit, which we have not, but if we would fail an audit, the federal government would say, you can't do federal audits anymore. Y'all are going to have to hire someone privately to do those. Your audit agency doesn't have the ability to do them. It has ramifications. So it's very, very important that we understand and comply with the auditing standards so that we can continue to do the audits as well. So as much as nobody likes these forms, we don't make them up just because we don't think y'all have enough to do. We really do not do that. We know you're busy. We know it's going to take time. But we have to get this information somehow. Whether you fill out these forms or we interview you, it's going to take some time. And as I said earlier, once we've obtained an understanding of how your office works in preparing these financial statements, then we can focus our audit. Again, try to be as efficient as possible to do the minimum amount of testing that is required to support our audit opinion. I mean, technically, we could look at 100%. As I said, we would be there a whole long time, and you would get awfully sick and tired of us. But that's not necessary to do it. And that's why we get this information and do this testing. Okay. On the website, I did a mock-up. I did a pretend one. Please do not cut and paste. I made this stuff up. Don't say it happens in your county if it's not really happening, but this is just a mock-up to give you some ideas of what we're looking for when we're looking at this. So again, if you have that, you can pull it out. Otherwise, top, who's filling out the questionnaire? More than likely, it's going to be you, the auditor. In my case, I put me down as the auditor when you're looking at the sample, and I'm living in Paradise County, because every day in my county is a day in paradise. That may not be the case for you, but fortunately, I live there. The Form 7 is the understanding of 4 of the internal control requirements. So Ricky already talked a little bit today about control environment or tone at the top. You have control environment, you have risk assessment we talked about yesterday a little bit. You have control activities, which is where most of you think about. These are the actual policies and procedures and all of that going through. You have information and communication, and you have monitoring. What the 7 does for us is pull the information about the control environment, the risk assessment, the information and communication, and the monitoring. So it's broken up in those sections. So the first question on here is under control environment. As Ricky said earlier, it's the tone at the top. And I'm not saying that this is all true, but we get citizen complaints and different complaints, and we'll say, well, that's really a county issue. You should take that to the commissioners. And the number one answer we get is they don't care. Now, I'm not saying that's true. They probably do care. But that's what you don't want your employees to say. They don't care whether we do it right or not. It's the tone at the top. They know you care, okay? So the first question is, what action is taken to address departures from approved policies or unacceptable conduct that might create errors on the accounting records? We're asking you, when it doesn't go the way you think it's going to go, what do you do? Do you say, oh, well, maybe next time? Do you have policies in place to address it? It's a lot easier to address problems if you have those policies beforehand. I once, it was not an auditor, but I once had an elected official tell me, well, so-and-so won't let me see their work. They work for you. What do you mean they won't let you see their work? You know, she did not have control. You need that control, that they understand that, okay? This still showed Todd's up there, but use this one because it's much more interesting. Okay, the second question on there, I guess it was not showing. If fraud is alleged, what does management or the governing board or the board do to investigate the allegation, take appropriate and consistent actions against violators, and assess how relevant controls could be improved? Again, what are we asking? What do your commissioners do? What do your council do? Do they have policies in place? Or do they tell you to deal with it? Or do they say, I don't care? I'm sure it runs the gamut, from people that don't care at all to people care entirely too much and are trying to micromanage your office. Neither extreme is good, but we want you to document honestly what your county's policy is for these things. One thing I do want to point out, and I did check this for sure under the new procedures, when they send this information to you, what they are going to do is go to the last audit project, pull out the Form 7 that you did last year, and include that in the packet. They're not sending you a blank form. They're sending you what you filled out last year and asking you to update it. So you're not starting from square one, which you shouldn't. If it hasn't changed, if you read it over and this is exactly what you're still doing, and there, like I said, there hasn't been a change in any of this, then there's not a lot for you to fill out. You can just document, sign it, yes, this is still correct. So I can't imagine any county that someone hasn't filled this out at some point. So for most of you, again, it's updating it, not starting from square one. If there are changes, try to update that. You might put it in another color or highlight it. Hey, starting in November, this changed for us. We got a new policy, and here's where you can find it. So update the changes, and if you can, the effective dates, when it went into effect. Again, we need to know that. Okay, the next section is on risk assessment. Let me get to that. And the first question it asks under there, what procedures are in place to ensure that the information reported in the financial statements are correct and reflected of the accounting records? That's what we talked about when I started. What are your procedures in place to make sure that your AFR information is accurate and complete, that all the funds are listed, that all the funds are accurate or are supported by reconcilements back to where that money is being held? Okay. Do you have procedures? And if you don't, be honest. We don't. We're going to write some because we know we need to. But, again, and if you've updated them, put in, go down a paragraph and either change a color or highlight or something. This is what we're doing now, and this is when we started doing it. The risk assessment process it's documenting here is your risk assessment process. And that is an ongoing thing in internal controls. Every time something comes to your attention where something doesn't work the way you think it should, you should be going, what's the risk that this is going to happen again, and what do we do to stop it? And when you call and tell us things, we'll often ask what new controls have you put in place? A county will call and say, we had a check. Someone took one of our checks and they, whited all the information out or bleached out or whatever and wrote false information and got it, took money. And working with the bank to get that money replaced. It was a fraudulent check. So what are we doing to prevent that? Are we going to a positive pay? Are you, what other procedures are you putting in place to make sure that that doesn't happen? anytime something like that comes up, that's what you should be addressing. What is the risk that this is going to cause a problem to my financial statements or the protection of the assets that I'm in charge of, and what am I going to do to replace that? Okay. We always ask, and we try to ask for your departments as well when we send out questionnaires. What areas have been identified that pose to fraud risk? We also ask your commissioners and council when we do the entrance conference, are there any areas you have concerns? Is there a problem out at your highway department? Is there a problem out at your sheriff department? Is there a problem out at the county home or your transfer station or whatever? Are you aware of any risks? And you need to be identifying those because that money is flowing into your financial statements. Even though the departments are responsible for collecting it, it is part of the revenue that makes up your financial statements. And if half of it isn't getting to you, then it is not really a correct report of what your revenue should be. So you need to address any fraud risks that come up. If you have, again, we've talked about this before, if you have known or very likely suspicion that fraud is being perpetrated in your county, you are required to report to us and your prosecuting attorney's office by law. So make sure you keep that in mind as well. But even if there's something that is less than that, just what kind of risk is there? What can we put in place? And what we're asking on this form is, what have you done with that? What kind of assessments do you do? Do you discuss it among your staff? Do you brainstorm it? Do you go back to your governing board? Where are you where are these risks coming from? And just document the procedures that you do. And again, if you didn't do anything before and you start doing something, then put the updated information in this form so this document will carry forward. So again, this form is important. It should not be blank. Bear that in mind. It should be an update of what you've already noted, what you've already done. So you read through it, see if it's still in effect, if there's any changes, update any changes. This form is very important to us to gain an understanding of your controls. We do verify these controls. So this is not the end of it. So if you say such and such happens, we're going to go see it. We're either going to observe it, we're going to look for verification on documents. We're going to see, if you say every bank reconcilement, if you're in a department, every bank reconcilement is reviewed every month, we're going to go and see that. And if we find out 6 out of 12 months it wasn't, then those controls are not implemented. So it's not enough to say it. It has to be enough that we are going to go ahead and look at it. But this is the start of that so that we understand what controls are in place. And again, I gave you a mock-up on there, and you can pull it off. I'm not going to read all of the questions. Most of that is just brainstorming. It is not what has to be there. It doesn't cover everything. It's just some ideas to get you thinking. Ricky and I would be happy to discuss. If you get one of these and you're just blown away by it, let us know. We'd be glad to brainstorm with you. And again, none of you should be getting a blank one, because I just can't imagine a county not having already filled this out once. Maybe some smaller units might have that, but you all should have had one in the past, so you're filling it out or updating it and not starting from scratch. Oh, look, this has Ricky put in. What is that called? Animations or something? Oh, yeah, animations. Cool. I'll go back and do that again. Okay. The next form that you get is called a Form 9. It is understanding the entity and the environment. Okay. I did one of these as a mock-up. That's in yours, and again, just to give you ideas to think about. So it's still me as the county auditor, and I'm still living in Paradise County and a little piece of heaven. That's the or county seat. A lot of this information is pretty self-explanatory. Where is your county located? How do we get mail to you? What's your phone number? Some of it we pre-fill, and again, this is still not going to be a blank document because we know generally what counties do. If there's something that you also do that's not on here, maybe unique to your county, that you have a health center, you have, I think airport is on here, but you have some other program that you oversee, add it here so that we know what programs that you are overseeing. The point is to give us an understanding of your county and how it works. Your county is going to be more similar to another county than it is to a city in town or a school. But remember, we've got new FEs that have not audited government before. And so this is an important document for them also because they audit all of these different units. And there are rules that apply to counties that don't apply to other entities. There are programs that y'all do that they don't, and vice versa. Programs they do that don't pertain to a county. So this is where our field is getting an understanding of how your county government works in your county. This is another thing that auditing standards require. You know, they don't want to know that we don't know anything about what the rules are in place or what the governments do that we're auditing. You know, we don't want to send an FE up to audit a recorder's office. They have no idea what a recorder does. You have to understand what you're looking at. Went over that part. Okay. So structure, a lot of this is pre-filled again because we kind of know what counties do. So unless there's something specifically that your county does that's not on here, if there is something that's on here that you do not have, just draw a line through it. See, Todd's not very inventive. He's just in the town of Toddville. We're in Paradise County, people. And here's an example for his where they actually drew a line. Our town doesn't do this, so they drew a line through those activities. You can do the same thing and you can add. This is an important section, especially for counties, because we need to know what departments you do have so we know which ones we need to look at and whether those departments collect money or not. Is that revenue that's flowing into your county? Are they departments that get a lot of federal grants? So we need to know that because we're going to be looking at them when we do the federal audit. Have you had any concerns on these departments? This is your chance to let us know. If you think they're not doing something, you're not getting them in trouble. You're just giving us a heads up. We think there's some issues here. So yes, we have some concerns and we'd like you to look at it. Sometimes it's enough for us to then, like we have talked about, for an FE to say, you know, the auditor gets to ask this. You have to provide this information. And it's enough then for them to go, I didn't know that. You know, I just thought she was being mean to me. If these things change, again, you're updating. So you're going to have what you did last year. If you have a new department, add it. If you eliminated a department, take it off. I don't know how often that happens, but it could if you decide not to do a function anymore. If you had a concern last year and you don't, mark through it. If you didn't have one last year and you do, somehow highlight it, document that this is a change. We do send these electronically, so you can either print them off and do it, or you can edit it. It's a Word document. You can edit it right there. We do ask for the members of your governing board, so this is something that can change. If there's been an election, commissioners might change, your council members might change, but we need to know who they are. We ask for the background just because it gives us an idea of how well they're doing in governing. If they know, they're coming from a financial background or they're coming from totally unrelated. You know, when we're looking at schools, were they teachers before? Are they farmers? Where is their focus going to be? So it's not, it just gives more information for us to put in our whole picture when we're looking at our risk assessment and our understanding of what your county does and where we need to be looking for things. We need to know who the principals are, who's doing this in your office, who does your main bookkeeping, who's doing the payroll processing, vendor payments, who your directors for your departments. And again, it's just to give us information. If you've got it here, we can go directly to them. If this information is not here, then you know we're going to be asking you or someone in your office, how do we get a hold of? And again, you will not get a blank document. You are updating. So bear that in mind. But if you have any questions on anything on this form, after you look through this, and again, I tried to go through and put some suggestions in, but if you have any questions about it, we would be glad to discuss it. We don't want you thinking, I have no idea what to do with this, and I'm just not going to answer it. Because if you don't fill it out, I know what I used to do, sit in your office and ask you all the questions. So to recap, let's see if this works. To recap, this document gives us an understanding of how your county works and the environment in which you are operating. We didn't go through all of them, but we ask about your principal taxpayers and things that might have changed in there. What kind of environment are you working in? Are you a growing county? Are you a small county? You will be getting this prior to us getting on audit site, to give you time to go through it and make some updates and have it available for the audit team. And again, you should be getting a document you're updating. I can't imagine anyone getting a blank one. Form 13, we've talked about this. We send you out the financial statements. And just as we talked about at the very beginning of this presentation, what we are auditing are those financial statements. We historically had a history of compiling the financial statements, and then we audited them. If we do that now in the current auditing environment, we would certainly fail peer review. You cannot audit your own work, and you can understand that. I compiled your financial statements. They're perfect. I certainly didn't make any mistakes. No need to look any further. I'm perfect. So that's why we're saying we can't do that anymore. So a workaround for us is to take the annual financial report that you load into Gateway, to perform some macros on it, produce a financial statement that we can audit, and have you say, yes, this information represents my county, this is supported by my funds ledger, my financial records. Go ahead and audit this, because this is what we are. And that is the Form 13 documents for us during our peer review. We did that step. So if you've done, as we talked earlier about the prep of the AFR and the CFA, if you've gone through those steps, and you know what that is, then it should be a fairly simple thing to sit down with the financial statements that are sent to you, which there is a macro, so there's always a chance for error, to sit down and go, yep, these fund numbers match what I put in. So it goes by sections through what you're actually reviewing. So the first is a statement of receipts, disbursements, and other financing sources, especially the financial statement. That's what's compiled from your AFR, so it's going to include all the supplemental funds that we talked about earlier. And you are signing, when you're signing this, you're saying that that information is how you put it into the system. It is what you expected it to be. So are the beginning balances, do they tie to last year's report? They tie to your beginning records? Receipts and disbursements, they tie to your funds ledger? The ending balances, all accurate? There weren't any mistakes in that? Are the titles of the funds correct? You know, even in putting in gateway, if you've chosen a fund number or something and it doesn't, or it's a local ordinance fund, if the number or the name is not coming out correctly, this is your chance to correct it, because it should be what your records show. The notes to the financial statement, we're going to go over a pretty big, some changes coming up in the next section, so I'll save it for that. But right now the notes are pretty tailored. So they're very standard. There's not much you need to look at. However, if you have a subsequent event, you need to add that or provide information to the team to get that added to your financial statement notes. We talked about if there is a negative balance in your report, why? If it's a reimbursable grant, that's pretty straightforward. If there's another reason, it's your chance to say, this went negative because, and this is why, and it's going to be corrected. You know, maybe we underestimated revenue, and so now we've had to make adjustments to that. But that note explains why those fund balances are negative. It is important. It gives you your chance to explain that information. So the notes are important. The combining schedule of receipts, disbursements, and other financing sources and uses is where the summary, which is the first page, is broken down by fund. So when you go through that, it should tie. If your numbers on the summary statement are correct, they should all be, it's just more detail. And all of it comes from your AFR. But again, you need to go through and look at it, make sure there weren't any errors in that. The other supplementary schedules, so the things we ask about like payables and receivables, schedules of leases and debt, and the schedule of capital assets. Make sure that the information that's getting into the report is what you put into Gateway. It's really what you're doing. Yes, this information is what I put in. That's what you're signing off on. The CFA. Again, I believe that they'll send you the CFA, but you're looking at that back to your grant schedule and your grant records. Are all the grants there? Did we miss any of them? Are the amounts reported correct? And maybe there was an error, you know, if you checked it was a reimbursable grant and it was actually an advanced grant, this is your chance to correct it here and make those changes. The notes to the CFA are pretty short. If you don't have insurance or loan, I think they're pretty standard. So those, you can read through it, make sure you don't disagree with it, but there really isn't a lot to do with that one. And overall, are your fund names correct? Is the unit name correct? You want to make sure that that's all the way across, because these are your financial statements. They've run a macro off the AFR, but these are where you're saying, yes, this represents my county's financial information. And you are signing that, taking responsibility for those numbers. Those are the numbers we will audit. If you have corrections to make the corrections, and will we audit the corrected information. There are questions about that and why we do this? Yes. It really, she's asking, will we take exception? If you're correcting it because something didn't go, no, we're not going to take exception. You've corrected it. It's the same thing if we would provide an audit adjustment. It isn't necessarily non-compliance, so you can have audit adjustments that we say, we really think this is a better representation of what you need to have. You accept it, then we go through with that. If it's a non-compliance issue that's underlying it, then there could be a comment. Really depends on what the cause is. Oh! Oh, this is so exciting. So this form is used to manage, as management, for you as management to acknowledge your responsibility of financial statement. So again, it shows that we're delineating the responsibilities. We're auditing this. You're compiling and preparing this. This is the information you need to be audited. It will be sent to you prior to the start of an audit along with the financial statement, so you have a chance to look at them and say yes, or if there are corrections, what needs to be corrected. So initial each item, where there's a little line beside them after you've made that check, put your initials in to show that you looked at that. That documents that you're accepting that. And then on the second page, you're going to sign and date that you're taking responsibility. And this is the information you want audited. Okay. When I talked about the 7, I said it went over 4 of the components of internal control. This form, the 45, goes over control activities. So this is the more complicated. These are the actual processes and procedures. If you have written down internal control procedures over receipting, balancing, payroll, paying claims, reconcile, if you have anything, give that to the FE. That's what they're looking for. What we have historically seen, as we've been hammering home our wonderful internal controls, is that not a lot of them are written down. And that's what this form does, is get that information. But if you've written procedures, we will be pleased to take them and incorporate them and not go, we might have questions about them, but just incorporate them that way. If you have not, or if you don't have them for every procedure, then we're going to have to gain an understanding of what your controls are that are in place. And they give, again, the Form 45. They will take it from last year's project, will send it to you and ask you to update it. So read through it. If it's still how you are doing your procedures, fine. If you've made any changes, either put them on here or attach your written procedures that you've made. This one is going to go in a lot more depth because it is procedures. Who's taking the money? Who does the deposit? Who takes it to the bank? Who reviews it? Who posts it to the record? Who's, how are corrections done? Who does the compilation of the AFR? Who reviews it? All of that is information we're trying to gather so we have an understanding. So if you rearrange duties in your office, whether you've done it by title or by name, then you're probably going to have to update this because now you've got new procedures. Try to put when that went into effect, what month basically that you changed over. The instructions on this form is a pretty good description of why this is. This becomes a work paper, so it's pretty well written for our peer review. But it's saying the understanding of the unit's processes for each significant audit area and component should be noted below based upon the understanding gained. Answer the questions below based on what the unit has proper segregation of duties or not. That's what we're reviewing. So you're going to put those in and we're going to look and say, was it designed properly? Is it implemented properly? And if necessary, we will test it if we're going to rely on it. If it's not designed or implemented properly, we're not going to rely on it. We're not going to do any testing. But then we've moved forward on how we're going to do it. We might have to increase our substantive testing based on that. There are different areas: initiating, recording and processing, reconciling and reporting for each of these. For a county, this can get pretty complicated because it's not only your office, it's the treasurer's office, other departments as you do receipting. It is possible there might be some other questionnaires that they give you, or the FE may interview you on policies just to make sure they have an understanding of that. But it is my understanding what they're doing now when they're sending out these letters, is they're putting the last 45, they're taking that out of the old work paper and putting it in. So even if this is your first year in office, you'll have what the former auditor did completed last time, and then you can update that. This is so fun. And what this does is help us evaluate prior to arriving on site which positions perform certain functions and to see if the duties are segregated. We need you to update the prior audit information to answer the questionnaire. The other thing to bear in mind with timing, if something changed in 2019, put it on there, because that'll save you having to do it next time. We've already got it documented when it's still probably fairly fresh. So if you had your audit in the middle of the summer, we're looking at what did you do between that and the end of the year, and then if there were changes in the first of the year, like I said, try to put the dates in there, if there were changes. Because we're looking at what controls were in place for the time that we're auditing. And we're going to carry that forward. It's going to be a working document. Questions on our beautiful, lovely, wonderful forms? Yes. She's coming.